If you were playing Call of Duty Mobile back in 2023, most of you would be familiar with the HVK-30 as one of the best assault rifles at the time due to having far superior lethality compared to existing options. In fact, it was so strong that it got banned from competitive play. It didn't really receive any significant nerfs, but the introduction of newer weapons and buffs to existing weapons slowly pushed it out of the meta, as it now had to compete with way stronger weapons. That is until the Season 9 balance changes, in which the devs went ahead and brought it back from the dead. In fact, they might have gone a little too far. So in this video, I'll be explaining why the buff is so significant, why the HVK is so good, and what's the catch, if there's any. Which should prove to you that the HVK-30 is the perfect assault rifle. Before I get into what changed with the HVK, I do need to give some context. One of the most vexing aspects of the HVK was the extremely punishing upper arm multipliers. If you so much as land one shot to the upper arms, that 3-tap potential, which is the weapon's main selling point, is gone. Since it is pretty easy to land at least one upper arm shot in a gunfight, this means that it will end up 4-tapping quite frequently, resulting in a very mediocre close range time to kill compared to the current meta weapons. This also greatly limited your consistent 4-tap range, all the way down to 29 meters with the monolithic suppressor. Not great considering that we have weapons with better consistent time to kill and or range. Back when his only competition was the Kilo 141 and Krieg 6, this wasn't that big of a deal since their 4-tap time to kills were pretty similar. But these days, we have weapons that are just as, if not even more lethal than the HVK, while being way more consistent, which slowly but surely made this weapon obsolete. You know, a video covering the time to kill power creep would actually be pretty interesting.
I'll put it on the list.
So the HVK remained in this awkward state until this season's balance changes came in, as the devs decided to completely eliminate that exact problem I was just talking about by increasing the upper arm multipliers to match the lower arms and stomach, so now your shots to kill only get penalized if you hit the legs. For the rest of this video, I shall be comparing the HVK against the other meta 3-tap weapons, the DRH and the USS-9. The first advantage of the HVK is the time to kill. The 3-tap time to kill of the HVK is top tier, clocking in at a very impressive 181 milliseconds. This is not only the fastest killing 3-tap assault rifle, but the fastest killing fully automatic assault rifle that isn't a 2-tap. This is mainly due to the fact that it has a faster fire rate than most of the 3-tap weapons. This has the added effect of nullifying a downside that's commonly associated with most 3-tap weapons, that being the slower fire rates. So even if you aren't super accurate, you aren't punished quite as hard with the HVK. While yes, there are other weapons that can compete with this time to kill, those weapons either have extremely slow fire rates, have worse effective range, or have much less consistency. The HVK has none of these issues, meaning that it strikes the perfect balance between sheer lethality and practicality. Headshots are also very strong in the HVK. Landing just a single headshot will extend your 3-tap range to the second damage phase. And just like with the USS-9, if you're lucky enough to land 2 headshots in the initial damage phase, you can achieve a 2-tap for an effectively instant time to kill of 91 milliseconds. Beyond this range, the HVK can reliably 4-tap for a time to kill of 272 milliseconds up to a very impressive 44 meters, which more than covers most practical ranges you'd find in standard multiplayer and puts you on the level of some main ARs. So not only are you capable of outgunning SMGs up close, but you're also extremely competitive at longer ranges. Since we are on the topic of range, the HVK features great bullet spread accuracy, which is more than enough to make use of its great 4-tap range. Recoil is moderately low. It does have some horizontal sway, although the vertical kick is pretty low, so while it isn't quite as precise as something like an XM4, you shouldn't be encountering that many issues at longer ranges. The HVK is also quite competitive in terms of mobility. The ADS time is pretty average at 270 milliseconds, but its sprint speed is much more impressive at 6.43 meters per second. This is about the same as the XM4 with the bruiser grip, and is pretty close to a lot of the SMGs, so you can get around the map fairly quickly compared to most other flex ARs and close the distance to make use of that 3-tap time to kill. EDS movement speed is slightly slower than average for assault rifles, but it isn't slow enough to be a real complaint. So what are we working with here? We have one of the best time to kill profiles in the game, a more forgiving fire rate than other 3-tap weapons, more than enough BSA to make use of its great range, decent recoil, and excellent sprint speed for an assault rifle. Is there even a downside to this gun? The first one is one that's been around ever since the introduction of the large caliber ammo, the mag size. The HVK has a relatively low magazine capacity at 28, giving you a kills per mag of less than 10. If you're used to guns like the DRH or USS-9, which I'll be surprised if you're not, this should be more than familiar. But if you're used to assault rifles with bigger mags such as the XM4 or RAM7, then you might find yourself running low on ammo in awkward situations. The HVK also has a shorter 3-tap range than the other meta 3-tap weapons, extending up to 17.5 meters, which is about 10 meters shorter than the USS-9 if you max out the range, and less than half of the DRH. Now I know that sounds bad, but this is actually the only thing that is keeping the HVK from being the most broken gun in the game, not that it's doing a very good job at it. Most 3-tap weapons are balanced by either having a slow fire rate or worse consistency, but the HVK has neither of these while also having a faster time to kill, so the only thing left to tweak is the range. If this gun even had, say, 20 meters of 3-tap range, then it would be absolutely f***ing insane. That would just make it a more forgiving Odin at that point. Even with the current range profile, it is still more than enough to screw over most SMGs in their prime ranges. And sure, it's not going to insta-kill you up to some crazy distance, but unlike the other 3-tap weapons, the HVK's 4-tap is actually workable and goes up to a very impressive range, so it's still not that big of a disadvantage. Overall, the HVK-30 is easily a top-tier assault rifle. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that it is arguably the best flex weapon in the game currently. Yes, even beating the Odin and USS-9. The USS-9 does have the benefit of faster handling and longer 3-tap range, but the HVK simply has the better overall lethality and is much more effective at longer ranges. It also has better sprint speed, which is pretty ironic considering that the USS-9 is an SMG. So these factors combined make the HVK the more versatile weapon overall. The Odin, on the other hand, despite having a faster time to kill than the HVK, has to deal with a much slower fire rate, so missed shots are extremely punishing. It also has slower mobility and handling, making it less suitable in aggressive scenarios. So when you think about it, the HVK is pretty much the perfect weapon outside of the smaller mag size. And in all honesty, this gun is somewhat overtuned and could use some nerfs. Now I'm not saying that it needs them right now, since it quite literally just got buffed. But if it were to get nerfed, this is what I would do. The biggest issue with the HVK is that its 3-tap is way too easy to achieve for how fast it is. To fix this, I would reduce the stomach multiplier from 1.4x to 1.35x. This means that in order to 3-tap in the initial damage phase, you will have to aim above the stomach, as landing just a single stomach shot will penalize your shots to kill unless you land a chest shot. This encourages the player to aim higher, putting it in line with the other weapons with similar time to kill potential, such as the HG-40, KN-44, and UL-736. But in return, I will also increase the base damage in the third damage phase from 18 to 19. This is just to ensure that it can still 4-tap to the stomach at longer ranges. When it comes to building the HVK-30, we have two main options here. For the standard flex build, which is the one I've been using in the comparisons of this video, start with the large caliber ammo. This is the mandatory attachment, as this is what gives us the previously mentioned time to kill profile. Monolithic suppressor for range and concealment, MIP light barrel for mobility and handling, MIP strike stock for better hit flinch and BSA, and the sleight of hand perk to partially offset the smaller mag size by reducing your downtime. Alternatively, if you want a more aggressive build, you can swap out the last two attachments for the YKM Combat Sock and Granulated Grip Tape. With this build, you get some really impressive mobility and handling for an assault rifle, comparable to some of the Flex SMGs, but your accuracy will be a little bit worse. And that covers everything there is to know about the HVK-30. The HVK was already a pretty decent assault rifle even before the buff, just that it got power crept out of the meta. But with this season's buff, it is absolutely a god tier option now. In fact, this along with is why I'm actually tempted to sit this season out. But that's just my experience from using the weapon. So what do you guys think about the HVK-30? Do you guys agree that it's a top tier weapon after the buff, or do you think it's just okay? Be sure to let me know in the comments, and if you found the video helpful, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. But until then, I'll be seeing you in the next one. Bye bye.